I don't know how many talks we've had, but this is the last of the year, of this very interesting and difficult year. So we're coming at you from Amsquatchie, Waskagan, or sometimes known as Edmonton, Alberta. We are in Treaty 6 territory here, which is the traditional territory of Indigenous people, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Inuit, and many others. Today, it's the home of many diverse people, and we welcome you all here, virtual or otherwise. And if this is the first time you've attended an SSI event, Sound Studies is an institute at the University of Alberta that is interested in research and creative activities that have to do with sound, regardless of what that is. So we're very interdisciplinary and very proud of that. We have researchers working on a variety of archiving projects and bioacoustics and linguistics and sound art and composition, of course, and performance and all kinds of other things. So we're really happy to have you all here. And I want to thank Oliver Rossier and Tom Marklinger and Gail Mandrick, part of my team, that make all this work. And we've come to the end of a very difficult year. And I think that one thing that we've found that's been really exciting about this year is moving these talks to later in the evening, and having them all be online has actually increased the number of folks who have come to see the talks. And so that's really exciting for us. So we're working hard to put together the next year of talks and are aiming to make that as diverse as this year, if not more so. So we'll be excited to send you more information about that when we have it. And if you'd like to donate to Sound Studies, we do have a place on the website where you can do that. Just you can visit that there and learn more about our programs and the things we do here. So for this final event, we're really happy and excited to be welcoming Gordon Fitzell, composer, sound artist who teaches at the University of Manitoba. And it's just a nice convergence of things that's happened this year. I want to mention, and I'll say this a few times tonight and try to remember, but we have a concert happening on Friday night, a live streamed concert. The concert's not live. It was pre-recorded, but it will be streamed for the first time this Friday evening at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And it's a concert that's been a little bit, something we've been working on that got interrupted and things got confused and a lot of things happened, but it's Roger Admiral, pianist, who's a great champion of new music and is just very, very active in wanting to perform contemporary music, which is one of the reasons we love him. And he proposed a concert to do some new works by faculty composers here. And so this concert on Friday will feature a work of mine, actually, and a piece by Mark Hannison as well. And we decided to approach Gordon about adding a piece as well, just because we were interested in having him come and speak. And so that concert on Friday will also feature a piece of Gordon's, and we're really excited to be able to hear that. And maybe he'll be talking about that piece perhaps this evening, although I think his talk is going to be a little more general about his work. He's going to talk about some of his unorthodox approaches to incorporating technology into the creative process, which I'm very excited to hear about. And he's going to be presenting projects including his interdisciplinary student group, the Experimental Improv Ensemble, which I have to say was a kind of a model for us when we developed our improvisation ensemble here. And so we still have plans to have a kind of online duo at some point. Hopefully next year we can resume, when we have performances again, we can resume conversations about that. He'll also be addressing non-electrical acoustic works, such as the solo piano piece that'll be presented on Friday, and some analog and digital electronic works, such as his Techno Messiah, and some other projects that we're really excited to hear about. And so I will now turn it over to Gordon Fitzell.
Thanks, Scott. This is fantastic. Thank you for the invitation. I'm pleased to be here, pleased to be part of the Sound Studies Institute program. And just a quick personal note, as I look through the audience, so to speak, they're not only colleagues, but friends of mine. Hey, Roger, Antri, I know both of the Marks and Ardell. Great to see you, even though you're only this big. But glad you can all be here, and pleased to see so many of you. Certainly, as a composer of new music, I am highly skilled at speaking to only 3 or 4 people, so this is a treat. That's great. Let me attempt to share. Yay. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this is, I think maybe it came to be first that I was going to have a piece in this concert, which is great. I'm a big fan of Roger Admiral's playing, as I know many of you are as well, and it should be a great concert on Friday with pieces by Mark and Scott and Dri and myself. I'll do a really quick bio because some of you know me and some of you don't. So I'm a composer, sometimes some would say sound artist, and I do some improvising, concert presenting. I'm an artistic director of Groundswell, which is a concert presenting group in Winnipeg, and I'm a composition prof at the University of Manitoba. And I've got technology in my title here, but I probably write for acoustic instruments maybe about half the time. But part where I'm going to go with this is I'm really just a user of technology. Some of us uh, are able to code and build technology. I do a little bit of that, but mostly I'm a user, and as such, there's a limitation right there. And so I've tried to, in a way, follow that limitation, and as they say, have limitation be one's best friend. Uh, like the Stravinsky quote that I can't quite remember, but their imposing constraints can be a path to freedom. And so that's what I've found in a sense that basically, I guess I'm saying embracing one's ignorance about something helps you find this childlike freedom. At least it does for me. So that's where I'm going with this. And in a way, the bending technology title, I do get to some actual bending uh, in a more typical sense at a few points in my talk, and definitely at the end. But a lot of it, I mean it metaphorically, and it's part of describing like a journey that I've been more and more aware of over the years. But to begin, it's more of a metaphor for unorthodox applications of pre-existing technology, and and Scott, for one, is a master at this. So we have him to look up to. But anyways, it's a path, an evolution through some of my works with this particular focus. But what I want to do is start by telling you some of the things that I've been doing with my students that have really influenced what I've done in my own creative pursuits. So we'll look at some improv, and as I say, for that, I'm going to introduce those of you who don't know it to this student group I have called the SHE, is how we pronounce it, Experimental Improv Ensemble. And it just totally stumbled into existence when I started teaching in Winnipeg at the U of M and started talking about improv. And the students said, hey, can we try that? And so we got together, and within a couple of years, we had an official ensemble, and we've been going strong ever since. Let's see. Yeah, I think the main point to get there is that we do a lot that's interdisciplinary. So my rectangle is the wrong shape. Here we go. We do a lot of collaborating both on and off campus. So that's not even all of them. We've done projects with a whole bunch of different on-campus departments. And also off campus, so essentially professional, so to speak, festivals and venues and things like that. And I'll look at a few of these, well, and some articles. This was one of our first back in 2007, where it was almost literally the kitchen sink, but we got together and had a rat's nest of cables at the Winnipeg New Music Festival. But that was the first of several shows we did at the Winnipeg New Music Festival. This was a live cooking show we did, so everything was hooked up to my laptop and live processing, and we raised money for Amnesty International. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to give you a sense of these unorthodox application of pre-existing technology, and then I'm going to funnel that into some of my own work. But as I say, this group has actually had quite an influence on my own output. And I guess as one gets older, I realize more and more that that's the case. When you're younger, it's go, go, go. And now I'm beginning to appreciate it a bit more, which is one of the nice things about being asked to give these talks. It's an opportunity for, there's a imposed framework for reflection. So that's really good. And what came out of it is that I see this thread in my music. So looking more with the student work here, this is a collaboration with the Faculty of Architecture where we sonified some sculptures using lightweight speaker cones. We've done quite a few live soundtracks. There's a little dude down here to give you scale. This was outdoors for Nuit Blanche, which was an amazing opportunity and experience. That was using a webcam for motion tracking so that we could control sounds with gestures. And very often we have collaborators with this, and this was with a master's student from the computer science department. And we've done one telematic concert live in different cities. And as Scott said, he and Mark and I were trying to get this together, but COVID came in the way, so we'll no doubt get that together soon. This is with my friend Stefan Smolovitz, where he came up with this system of lighting. So this involves my students, but also some professional players and a dancer. And essentially there are preset meanings to the different colors and a few other elements as well. And what it ends up being is a way to conduct an improvising ensemble. So you can control large, broad stroke, large gestures, but not the fine details. And you can be in the room, as Stefan is right here. And we also had, not at this very moment, but on this screen, Pauline Oliveros, who was in New York, and she was doing the controlling. So she had one feed for the audio and another feed for what it looked like, and was able to control it remotely. And with our soundtracks, we sometimes do video mapping, and in this case, we added theater to bring it to life. Here's a little blast of some video mapping where the students built these rather large wooden triangles, which I do recall in the middle of the night were strapped onto the roof of someone's car. That's a weather balloon, and then we video map and focus in on elements of a film and do soundtracks to it. And this is essentially like a soundtrack too. There was this duo group from New York called Foke Lokai, and they were kind of tech video hackers. I didn't mention, please feel free to jump in with questions at any time. Totally flexible and casual with all of this. So if you have something you want to ask, or if I'm not clear, just jump in and let me know. So this is another good example of collaborating interdisciplinarily such that we could accomplish something that we could not do ourselves. So this idea of video hacking and live video mixing and manipulating is something that we got to participate in, but we're not able to do ourselves. And there are various instances of that. And sometimes I'll show you an instance later where we bring something to the table that the other group could not have done themselves. This is something we've done a few times, which is celebrating International Pi Day on 3/14. So this is one of my former students, Isaac, and he's got a really great electric violin. And then we've got these lightweight speakers once again, which I got in some crazy place. I think it was the MoMA online store or something. I've purchased a few things there. It's crazy what they have. Anyway, they are attached to the bottom of these, wait for the pun, pie plates, which we then put colored water in, and Isaac determined or learned that on certain frequencies he could essentially make it bubble, and also learned that it splatters all over the place. So we put these up, and then it looked even better because then it was dripping down the side. And so this is a crazy celebration of Pi Day. And this being round is also a celebration of Pi Day. I don't know if some of you might have heard of cymatics, CYM. And it's essentially if you place granules of some sort on a membrane and have sound coming up from underneath it, it vibrates in such a way that once in a while it'll achieve these standing wave formations. So we had a webcam, a live webcam down on that and projected on a screen. And this is essentially how the experimental improv ensemble operates is we come up with an idea or we have an invitation or something like that, and we use whatever strengths we have, however orthodox or unorthodox they might be, and come up with something that works and then rehearse it. Let's see. I will jump to this project. This is not too long ago, January 2019, although it seems like a very, very, very long time ago. This is at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Probably a few of you know about that. It's actually a national museum that happens to be in Winnipeg, and it's very interesting in for a variety of reasons. And one of them is the architecture. So this is in one of the main large foyers, and we had an opportunity to perform there. So we decided to have the theme of the right to adequate housing. And so what you'll see here is, and there'll be some clearer pictures momentarily, but we decided to essentially build a house, or not really, but a structure, an abode of some sort as part of this right to adequate housing. There's a bit of right to clean water to go along with that. But a little bit like the cooking show, the building of it is a big part of the show, and then becomes obvious that we're in a way building an instrument as well, and it's all got contact mics and air mics and being processed live and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of it going up. And this is one of these things too, where we just took advantage of the skills that happened to be in the membership of the group. A couple of them, one in particular, was really great with construction. So he helped us out, and we achieved something that in a normal year we would not have been able to. That's him right there, Jesse. So that's what we started with. We laid everything out neatly as the audience walks in, and then we, in near silence, begin building. So we had hammers and electric drills and things like that. and mood lighting, of course. So eventually I sample those sounds and they get picked up in surround sound and that kind of thing. And here's, I think this is the high speed. So that was our performance at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And fairly often we try to have some social theme to guide us along the way. I think I'll move on to, I'll end my discussion of the student portion, the experimental improv portion, with an old project. This one ended up calling it Wall Balls. And it started with a master's student in the computer science department. Specifically, he worked out of the human computer interaction lab. And he had come up with what at first was a fairly basic interface for making sounds using a homemade smart table. Yeah, homemade smart table, I guess that's what they're called. Which homemade doesn't do it justice. I mean, it's just a wooden table, but there's a really expensive sensor, etc., at the bottom, and we have to calibrate each time we use it. But this was really great. We had many meetings with him and his advisor where we got to act as well, collaborators for sure, and to inform his decision making. And we really got to work collaboratively on this, where we could say, okay, we don't really need that function, but could it do this and this? Could you put this over here? Because we'll use this a lot. And what if we brought our own sounds in? So that's what we did. We had a couple of recording sessions such that each of these strips represents a sound file, some little gesture or texture that we created. And each of these is linked to one of these walls, and then these balls, all light images, bounce off them, and as they hit, and you'll see this momentarily, it makes the sound associated with each of these bars. So of course this table can sound like anything because A, it depends what sounds you bring to it, and B, how fast the balls are going, how many walls, so it can be truly very Spartan, very meditative, or it can be crazy noise music. And so we did this at the Winnipeg Music Festival a little over a decade ago, and we were actually doing it at the WAG, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, so we found a way to have inadvertent, well, not inadvertent, but resultant painting qualities, so that every time we touched it, there was an art, a visual art aspect to it. And we ended up doing an article on that as well. And here is a little video that shows wall balls at the Winnipeg Music Festival, and it's in quad sound, so that what comes from one corner will sound like it's coming from, of the table, will sound like it's coming from another, from that corner of the room. So I'll stop it there. As you can hear, this is the sound from a video cam. The actual sound in the moment was quite good and robust, and as I say, there was a bit of spatiality to it. And that was a really satisfying project because it completely didn't exist before, and we liked this and used it several times. I can think of maybe 5 or 6 places large spaces we used it. So it's a bit of an installation, and it's very collaborative. I've been speaking about the collaboration that goes into the creation of it, but also the using of it is very collaborative. Uh, Typically 4 people. There are 4 sensors, a maximum of 4 sensors that can be set up, and one could work destructively, but usually collaboratively and cooperatively to create a soundscape. And I guess maybe to point out the obvious, what was really nice about it, and by the way, again, we had another camera hanging above it and but projecting onto a wall, because in this case, unlike a lot of our concerts, there were a ton of people there, hundreds and hundreds of people. And so not everyone could have a clear view of the table, but they got a clear view on the wall of everything they were doing. And so, as I say, to point out the obvious, I think part of what was fun about this for the players and for the audience is it visualizes what's happening. You can see the ball hit the wall and make the sound, and you can hear a geometric shape being triggered and that sort of thing. So that was completely unplanned, just opportunistic. It came along, and uh, but I think because of the approach that we take in that ensemble, it led to something like that, and that's really the reason that I spent all this time talking about the experimental improv ensemble. So I'll move on to something a little bit different, but as I say, jump in at any time with questions if you want to. I'll talk about 1 or 2 installations. Like I say, 1 or 2 of those were what could be called performance installations. But this is more stuff I've done with weather balloons and with these lightweight adhesive speakers. So this is from the 6th floor of a nice old building, and the sidewalk is just out of view. And the idea is there's a microphone picking up environmental sound that more or less instantaneously goes up to my laptop on the 6th floor, back down, and that the foam core in the boxes and other things are resonating bodies, and so they act as very lightweight speakers. It's been done in a few different places and ways, but really, I would say that was a stepping stone to this other piece of mine called Spin, and I say it's for the mobile sound installation for 5 sonic orbs. So it started as just a fixed 2-track, like a stereo soundtrack for an architect friend for an installation that he did. Uh, he got to go to Portugal. I didn't, but my piece did. But then I completely rethought it and then made it into this performance installation piece again, uh, where those weather balloons are sonified and the performers wander around with them. So that was one performance. Here's a couple of years later. Introduced a little bit of visual art, but it really came together later that same year, 2012, in what city was I in? Which of those cities? Bruges. Um, and so the idea is it's not so much an on stage and then we clap sort of piece. It's a bit of a furniture music type of piece that's intended to be done at intermission or something like that. So there it is being done at intermission at the Concertgebouw in Bruges. And this was insane, and I'm never going to do it again. But I traveled from Canada, of course, all over Europe with this really, really heavy luggage, plus my own clothing luggage. And I don't know how I got through security, but I had basically everything I used looked like a bomb. There were pipes and wires and all kinds of things. But anyway, it all worked out, and they even rented me a compressed helium cylinder, and they got me really great young people to serve as my performers. And then some guy made a little 1-minute montage video that I'll play for you. So there it is, a very noir ending to that film. But one interesting thing about that, and I guess I could try to bend it to my theme of bending, is that the approach that I took is essentially, again, using pre-existing objects, elements, technology in ways that they weren't intended, and essentially getting it to do what I wanted, despite, in some ways, my own ignorance. Because this has happened a few times, and especially it happened twice in Bruges, which was uh, someone would come up to me and say, "Oh man, how did you how did you get the sensors to work? Because I heard that you transferred from one balloon to another, and then it seemed like when one got close to the other, it triggered a sound that came from the other. Did you have sensors on them?" And it was actually a great deal simpler, which was I just created an electroacoustic piece that has 5 tracks, and then I rendered each track separately to, in those days, what was an iPod, and that's what each of those people is wired up with, is an iPod, and then we just did the 3, 2, 1, go, so that they are adequately synchronized, and it had the effect, because I had cross-faded, etc., with this intent in mind. So it had the feeling of moving from one balloon to the other, etc. And I gave the performers instructions right down from to have a neutral expression and to walk not too quickly, not too slowly. And I guess I had a certain vision in my mind for how it would go, and then but there was a random quality to how the sounds appeared to move. So that's using technology, not quite in the way it was intended, but not quite bending. But I can get to one or two. Well, I'll briefly ensure that I'm not a liar, and I'll play some actual bending. So this was an older piece of mine featuring, some of you might know the clarinetist Francois Houle, and conductor and performer Giorgio Magnanensi. So this is Giorgio here, and yeah, I think I have a bit of audio. So as I say, I play that in part to render myself not a liar, because that is bona fide bending. Although really it's coming from Giorgio more than me. What I wrote is I created a visual piece such that they're kind of like movements, and they are to take their improvisation cues from this image that I created. and there are 10 more or so images like this. And then there are elements where I control the broad strokes again, what to do with dynamics, or some indication of what to do with dynamics, some indication of what to do with duration, who's playing, because it's a duo, and how to crossfade with what's coming next, etc. Then I'll just show you a few pictures quickly of a piece I did for Montreal artist Jean-François Laporte. So those are the weather balloons again. And in this case, I've got video mapping of the piece is essentially spinning clocks. I don't actually have a video here, but I have some still pictures. But the video itself is the score from which Jean-François improvised. And that was the intention. There he is, more balloons. So once again, it's this, I'm trying to, looking back on it, I think I was trying to embrace this idea of utilizing, we'll call it technology, in unusual ways. Still technology that I would not be capable of creating myself, but am capable of hijacking in various ways. So that's what I've become aware that I tend toward. And here's a piece that will be very familiar to one of you, who is Roger, who has played this, and this is for the concert coming up on Friday. So in this case, I'm looking at the piano as technology of sorts. So it's once again a bit of a metaphor, if not a stretch, but it's interesting because this whole piece, for one thing, is a real test of stamina, and it's just for that alone, it is spectacular to see Roger pull it off, because it's, I forget, 17 or 18 minutes of pretty much drumming or arpeggiating throughout. And I'll play a little bit for you, and then I'll tell you about where I took it afterward. So you can hear how Roger creates these wonderfully blurring textures and clouds, yet you can see how I've, in white notes, introduced a melody of sorts that slowly wanders in and out of the cloud. Whoops, go away. And so then I do a little bit of the same in different registers, melody moving a bit quicker. So one thing you might have noticed is it's all blurry, all cloudy. I mean, the melody is very clear, but intentionally, that was how I wanted those chords to be, and intentionally, that's how Roger is playing them. This is from a recording that we did in Winnipeg many years ago. But then finally getting to the part that really involves the idea of piano as technology is we're about 30 seconds, no, sorry, we're about, I was looking at something else. We're about 15, 14, I don't know, 15 minutes in, and the whole piece has been the sustain pedal down the whole time. And then suddenly there's this big moment where it's released, and I think, yeah, Sans Apped, where it gets dry all of a sudden. So to me, this was the big moment, and part of what the piece was about. And as I say, it's a bit of a stretch maybe to call this bending, but it is using the technology in a way that it really wasn't intended, right? The sustain pedal really is to help to aid phrasing and to give a color, but not really to put a brick on it for 15 minutes and then to suddenly bring it up and never use it again. So that's what happens at this point. And I think a little bit after this excerpt begins, we hear this moment. So there's several of these thrusts, and then we get to this mini movement 4. And so as you can hear, there's also the sostenuto pedal, which I won't get into the details of, but it allows everything to be dry except certain of those melody notes, if I recall my own piece correctly. So that's going to be up on Friday, and that's a totally acoustic approach to this idea of using technology a little bit differently. I think I'll not really talk about this one except to say that more of unusual technologies such as the piano with toy piano and unusual objects. So that's my approach often these days. I'm going to play a little bit of, yes, we take this idea all the way. I've got this pair of pieces called Violence and an electronic version called Evanescence. And so I'll just play the beginning of this. So this is what the totally acoustic original piece Violence is called, or it sounds like. So I'll stop there. By the way, it occurs to me that something that some people have said to me, and I've heard it said to others as well, is that the acoustic music sounds a little bit like electroacoustic music. Anyway, you can see that that music and that music are pretty much identical. And the group asked me a few years after I'd written the piece for them, did I want to create an electroacoustic part? And I figured I wouldn't. I liked it how it was, but the more I thought about it, I realized there's quite a bit of space. So you could look at this as now transforming an entire pre-existing piece. So I took my entire piece and completely gave it a facelift, and so it sounds a little bit like this. stop. There we go. Okay, I have gotten it to stop. So that's an example of transforming an entire pre-existing piece. And the last couple of things I'll talk about is I'll give you a little bit of this piece from just a few years ago. So it's a flute concerto for Mark McGregor, and it involved and the ensemble Aventa, interactive audio and video electronics. So I created all of that myself, which was a bit of a challenge and nearly killed me, but I was happy with the result. But essentially, it's more messing with pre-existing structures. So I started with this video of the artist Gerhard Richter and transformed that kind of image into this kind of thing, and then had various filters that further and further transformed it. But it's that idea, once again, of taking structure from something that already exists and bending it to my needs. I also took some artwork by Richter and ran it through an image to sound conversion program. I think in the interest of time, I'll give you a quick blast of it. So that ends up just being a background texture. And there's a whole backstory to this that I won't go into too much of it, but zooming in on something, dealing with this artwork of Richter, and slowness, pop, which has in part to do with pop music. So I would take pop music from the 1970s of Dusseldorf in a studio very, very close to where this artist lived and worked. He's still alive, but he's an old man now, but he was young back then in the 70s. So I would take these songs, and some of these are by bands you may not know, and the one that most of us would know is Kraftwerk. So I would take pop songs. And here's another. And then I would just find the really unusual split second between things and granulate and morph and come up with something that I was pleased with. So these are all elements that went into it, some for the video, some for the audio, and then there was a connection to the actual notated material as well. And here's a little bit of the video from this performance, which, by the way, also involves Roger Admiral. And incidentally, if you're not listening with headphones, it's very quiet and subtle. So live or with headphones, it's one of my favorite parts. But if you're not listening with headphones, it doesn't sound like much right now. So I'll stop it there. So that's a culmination of video, electronic audio, acoustic audio, all coming together with some elements here that I've just touched upon. And two last little things. So Deus Ex Machina is a piece I did just a year and a half or two ago. And once again, I won't go into too much detail, except to show you that it has shoes on it because they're stomping. So I like that score. But what I will show you is I took these are just simply found NASA recordings, or really sonifications of data. And then once again, I processed them such that this is a sextet, 6 players playing, and an audio track that was created entirely based on found material. So the idea I'm getting at here is, once again, utilizing pre-existing structures. So in closing, I'll just show you for a minute or two what I'm working on currently. It's a group called Duo d'Entre-deux, and Miriam Boucher is going to do the video to go with it. And I'm using data bending for the first time, really. I mean, I've done it in some ways, but I'm full on using it, which is basically the idea of opening non-audio files in audio programs. So you can get something like this. Which some of you might hear and say, oh, awesome, and others not so much, but I like it. So this is could be a Photoshop file, it could be a PDF, and opening it, only some audio programs will do this, but then I process them into some layer that I like. Then, as I'm always saying to my students, if you like something and you're going to do it, at least consider the idea of going all the way. So then I go further and I take this audio that I've created and I use the audio to MIDI conversion. And then we get MIDI from this audio, we get MIDI, which is an electronic form of it. And then from that, I go one further, and from the MIDI, I extract musical notation that the saxophonists will play. And all of this comes from the original data bending. And I think I've more or less filled my entire time. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Gordon. You left us with so many questions. Although, yeah, as we are right at 8 o'clock, and so I'll just say for those who have to go, thank you for coming, and please do come back to our website, Sound Studies website at the university, for information about our series next year. But for those of you who would like to stick around for a few minutes, I think we have time for questions for Gordon. And And I do see that there is one already in the chat, which I saw earlier from Cole. And Cole, if you'd like to speak your question, please go ahead. I think that Tom can unmute you, but I think I get the gist of your question. I think this is a spectralist question, if I'm not mistaken, but it's a question about.
Guilty.
Yeah. Oh, there you are. Why don't you go ahead and
Yeah.
re-articulate
So,
the question?
like the way you were talking about the piano as technology, it did make me wonder if your choice of pitch material was influenced by, I guess, the piano as technology. And I guess one of the other reason I asked this is the way that the resonances were acting in the piano sounded, I don't know, special. It sounded like there was something special going on there, but I may have just been hearing things wrong.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. I mean, special is what I was aiming for. But technically speaking, it wasn't spectral in the sense of focusing on certain harmonics or calculations thereof. So I was referring really to the mechanism of the piano,
yeah, so yeah,
the
your
pads,
main,
etc. Yeah. But you know what? To draw a U of A reference, which by the way, I was a student at U of A many, many years ago, and my teacher was Howard Bashaw. And I remember one of the ways that he sometimes composed is he would dim the lights down, sit at the piano, and he would almost close his eyes and not look at his fingers, and he would just keep going until he found, there's a good chord. And so it's a little bit Zen-like. So in that sense, of course, there's a spectral quality to it, but it's not a Tristan Uri kind of calculated approach in that particular piece.
I like all things Zen, so it's very nice.
Yeah, well, I did try to do that in that piece. Actually, I explicitly took let's say an Eastern philosophy approach, and it was new to me at the time. So I was trying to take a very passive, slow-moving approach, and it led to those very slow-moving clusters.
Yeah, if anyone else wants to jump in, I'll yield. But I do have one other question, I guess, like more philosophically about the way you approach composition and dealing with, I don't know, external electronic or physical equipment. Do you? I'm going to try and think of how I phrase this question. Do you more feel like the equipment is guiding you and you sort of follow the ways it takes you, or and in more on the bending thing, are you trying to sort of make it do what you want, or is it kind of a mix of both? Do you?
It's definitely, that's a really good question. And it's a great question for any composer, really, because there's technology and a violin and everything else. It's definitely both. But I would say if I had to choose one, the one that really I feel attracted to and that I recognize in my creative process more is the idea of following. So because I'm also an electroacoustic composer, probably those of you who are will recognize the pattern of being opportunistic, just messing around until, aha, there, gold, perfect, that's it. I have 99 iterations that were and then this one, which is amazing, and I'm going to keep that one. So I think we all approach composing in that way, in one way or another. So it can happen. Well, you know, I don't know how many. I know many of you do know Howard Bashaw. It's funny that I'm bringing him up, but it's one thing I remember from studying with him was this idea of really, really deeply listening to the music, and it really only that particular instance of sitting at a piano that really only works if you are unskilled at the piano, as you know, I'm medium skilled, as many non-pianist but musicians are. Someone like Roger, professional pianists, prodigies, pretty much you know where your fingers are and what you're playing. But if you don't, then that ignorance actually can aid that deep listening in a way. So, where I'm going with this is, it's the same way with technology. you're not thinking of exactly how the coding works when your computer does the work for you. You're just listening. And it's the same thing there, I would say. So that's why I'm saying fairly basic technology or extremely advanced technology. In most cases, you can't do it yourself and you're just benefiting from it. And so looking opportunistically for those moments is a pretty big part of what we do, whether we like to admit it or not, I would say.
Yeah.
At least for myself. Anyway, I would say that for myself.
No. I've met some people in like the Zen harmonic or sort of electroacoustic community, none I think here, but that are very focused on, I guess, imposing their will on like the external world, and especially when it comes to electronics, like they know how all the circuits work and they know exactly how they want things. And I definitely think I respect that, but I don't think I could ever work like that.
Well, and that's part of maybe a secondary or third tier message I'm trying to bring across, is that this is something that, when I was younger, I just started doing, and I didn't analyze or psychoanalyze too much. But now, as I get a little older, I realize why I did it, maybe what's good about it, what's weak about it, and really to embrace what works for you. And that's part of the journey. So for me, this idea of hijacking technology has been fruitful, I feel, for me, but it could be something totally different for someone else.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. I don't see any, so I'm just going to follow up with that great conversation with a question of my own. But yeah, this question of how deeply to get into the technology versus what it is you actually want to do as an artist is a really important one. And I think for some people, for some artists who have a real desire to leverage the possibility of controlling everything in the minutest detail, and also being capable of actually hearing in your head what it is you want to generate, or at least having some kind of concept that you think would lead to something interesting. That's one way of working. Another way of working is to be more improvisatory with the technology, which I know when Gordon brought up Pauline Oliveros,
Yes.
and
Yes.
something that is not as well known about her, I don't think. I mean, those of us, especially those of us who were lucky enough to be able to work with her, but who knew her in her later career, would talk about her as an improviser and someone who had this amazing extended instrument, the accordion, but was very, very much about improvisation. But her earlier, those people who may know her from her earlier work as a electronic music pioneer in the 60s might not necessarily think of her as an improviser. But actually, back then, she was also still improvising. She just used the studio in an improvisatory way. And she actually, in some ways, invented a way of thinking about using the technology that was not in vogue at that time at all. So I find that really interesting. Anyway, I'm coming roundabout to the question, which has to do with teaching, I guess. And I think it's wonderful that you've been able to bring your students into your own creative process through the ensemble by leveraging the skills the students have to come up with some kind of a common piece of music or art, multimedia art or whatever. But I'm just in the process of teaching students about the skills that are required to be a composer, I guess. Where do you draw the line? And I know this probably depends on the student. I mean, it's a hard question, but in terms of that kind of expectation that we have as professors to teach technique and to make sure that the students really know how to orchestrate things and really know how to set up a microphone and record a flute and then manipulate it and all that kind of stuff, right? All the tech, because it's both of those things are technology using technologies. But the other side of it is there's so much of that you can't learn it all. And so there's the other way of approaching it is to kind of gingerly sort of sneak up to it and kind of try some things out until something speaks to you, and then you decide how deeply you want to go into it. So yeah, I'm just curious about how you approach that in your teaching, and I'll leave it there. Leave it there, I guess.
Okay. Um, let's see. I think maybe one answer that might speak to some of those points you make is just like I more and more do in my life. I think with my students, I approach it as creating the conditions that are likely to be conducive to high quality creativity. And so that's part of what I try to bring to the experimental improv ensemble, that XIE, XIE. So it's true. I mean, I do bring that to it, and I try to create that environment. But it's also equally true that I get just as much out of what they bring to it, um, which I'm sure we can all relate to in different ways. Um, so that's that. I can elaborate on that a little bit, but just to reiterate, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is to create the broad stroke conditions that are going to be conducive to what you want to do. Um, Otherwise, it's unlikely to happen, not impossible, but unlikely. And the related question, I think, has to do with, well, if you do teach them something specific, what should you be teaching them? Um, you could have asked the average, very thoughtful person 40 years ago what should be taught in university, and you might get a very different answer from right now. They might be shocked that we're rather concerned about the Eurocentrism in universities, for example. Some might be shocked that we see a downside to institutionalized thinking. So that's all part of what I try to exclude. I mean, I'm perfectly aware that it's a little bit ironic that I'm a university professor and that to some extent what I'm aiming for is impossible because I'm a prof, they're university students. This is what we signed up for. But to a pretty considerable and I think meaningful extent, a considerable enough extent to be meaningful, uh, we we learn as we go. And it's probably nowhere more true in my teaching than in the experimental improv ensemble because it's by nature less defined than, say, if I were teaching orchestration, more so maybe if I were teaching theory, etc. But I actually, when I'm teaching improv, I take a very I make a very conscious effort to avoid guiding them in directions sometimes, so that because if I do, it's entirely probable, because I'm older and more experienced, that I might be able to guide them to a better place. However, that's not really what I want them to do. I want them to learn to listen to what's good, so that they can develop that skill, as I was saying, in their own way, because I would, in many students' cases, I would be successful in teaching them to do it my way, and it would be of some benefit. But it's, I think, especially as regards improvisation, and really improv isn't so different than composing, I think it's even more beneficial just to learn as you go. And it's always a balance of, you want to have an intention, a goal, a path that you think you should follow, but at every point along the way, nothing is sacred. If something seems better, go that way. If you think you were wrong, go back. And but to rigidly stick to, well, let's go all the way and call it dogma, is extremely dangerous, I would say. And as an artist, and definitely as a teacher, I'm more interested in helping students develop critical thinking, self-awareness, listening to each other, and in a way, a bit too poetic, but to listen to the muse, because I think many of us who are composers and artists will know that you might intend to, at the beginning, write a certain kind of piece, but before you know it, you're off track, but you can't stop because this might be even better. It wasn't quite what I was aiming for, but you have to follow it because you recognize it as being good. And it's just another example of being adaptive. As they say, it's more important to be, adaptability is more important than strength. And I would say possibly more important than predefined knowledge is to be adaptive. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
My answer was suitably longer than the question, but only just barely.
that's about what I was expecting, though. That's a good answer, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations about philosophies around running these ensembles, because I can tell that I have, and I'm sure Mark would agree. Both Marks, I think Mark Sager is here too, who's also directed our ensemble quite a few times. But yeah, that question about how to handle critiquing the session and how to guide the students towards something that might be more successful for them without imposing your own, I mean, with having them lead us to that rather than us leading them to that, is always really tricky. So having a way
Yeah,
to, you know, have some kind of deliberation after the performance or the session is what we find really hard to figure out. But yeah.
yeah. And now that we're speaking of it, I realize that I think I'm a lot more comfortable with the idea than I used to be when I started teaching
Yeah.
university. I used to be, well, like more of us, more confident, more arrogant, and I would have all their instruments coming to my mixer and my laptop, and I'd feel like, okay, no problem, whatever they do, I can save it and I can make it into something. But then I realized that I'm doing them a disservice, and I very quickly learned that it's much better to, as I say, help them hear what's going on and to get to know themselves as creators, I guess.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm sure I impose my will far too often, but I am making a conscious effort to do that, and it is a big part of the environment.
Well, and there's a certain expectation from them that you're going to do something at some point,
Yeah.
make some kind of decision. Cool. All right. Are there any other questions for Gordon? Not seeing.
I have
Diana,
a
thank you.
slight. Oh yeah,
Well, Cole has another question.
yeah.
Sorry.
If it's not too much, but did Diana ask a question?
No, I was just saying thank you, Diana.
Oh,
But go ahead, Cole.
yeah. I guess this is a much less philosophically profound question than what Scott is asking, although maybe a shorter answer. Do you have a preference when you're doing, I guess, electronic work, or even when you're, I guess, either in composition or performance, do you have a preference for software or hardware, or do you like mixing between them? Do you like doing one at different times? Like, what's your philosophy in that respect?
Well, unsurprisingly, I would say almost anything can be utilized toward good. Um, so it's wherever the muse takes me, basically, and to the extent that I don't run up against so much ignorance that of my own ignorance that I am unable to use, uh, certain software. I I sometimes want to do mathematical, make scientific applications that I very quickly realize I cannot. But generally speaking, I mean, I use um, all of many of the usual digital applications in my music, but I sometimes use a lot of old school lo-fi elements as well. So it really depends. I mean, as I'm working on a piece, I guess to take the question back a step, I try to do whatever serves the piece. And And those of you who are composers will probably know this thing where you have an idea for a piece and then you start massaging and getting material, and it becomes a bit fuller and you have a bit clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. And then really, for me anyway, only when you're, yeah, final save, it's done, only then do I actually understand, now I get the piece, yeah. So all of that, really, I guess it goes to what I said before, is remaining flexible and adaptive all the way till the end, and until it feels right, then it's not, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I think that is kind of what I expected, but it is very, yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you
Yeah,
for
great
that.
questions.
I'll give it one more round if we have any last minute questions or comments.
I was wondering if I could ask you a question, actually. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please go ahead, whoever that is. I can't see.
Yeah, this is Ben here, Ben Whittier.
Oh, Ben, okay, great.
Hello. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I was wondering, as you move into bending technology and things like that, in my practice, sometimes I bend it to the point where it'll break. And of course, bent technology, used for its not normal purpose is generally a little less stable than the others. Have you ever had problems with this? And if you have, when would you decide, okay, here's the point to stop bending?
Bend it so far that it breaks? Well, I mean, I'm really using it more as a metaphor, so I don't know if you can break a metaphor. So I'm not sure how to answer, actually. I guess it's a question of whether it seems interesting, profitable, fruitful to me, would really be the only measure of whether I might follow a path. Yeah, because a direct answer to your question, I don't think I can do it, except to say that I suppose I literally have broken a few things from time to time, and sometimes that's a problem, and sometimes that's a good thing. But really, for me, and I hope this isn't evading your question, but for me, it really is mostly a metaphor and mostly an approach to creation. I mean, I think I kind of enjoy feeling like a bad boy and hijacking things, but mostly it's this idea of trying to retain, like what in meditation or yoga is child's mind or child's perspective, as seeing things for the first time. And it also, I suppose, having said that, it's not too dissimilar to what I was saying about just being adaptive and open and not having predetermined structures and destinations. I mean, it's good to have an idea of where you want to go, but I think it's better to continually reflect and assess. In the same way it's good to do so with your life, it's good to do so with your work at every step along the way to make sure it feels good and it's going in the right direction, and let that be the guide. So in the sense that it's a metaphor, I'd say it's a more of a case of it's unbreakable.
Yeah, that helps a lot, actually. Gives me a lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. Then you can explain it to me.
So I'm seeing a strange blue icon next to Andrei Talpash's name, which I've never seen before. Now it's gone. Even though I've been doing these Zoom things for a while, I have no idea what that meant, Andrei, if that meant you were requesting to ask a question or it's gone now. Okay.
No, not at all. Sorry, Scott. I had a button.
No, that's okay.
Here.
I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything here.
No, it's beside the raise hand. It says go faster, which means I thought I was behind.
Oh, I see. I got it. I see it. I see that icon now. I hadn't seen that before.
I was not trying to speed up, Gord. It's okay.
No, good luck with that. Yeah. Great to hear your voice, though, Andrei. Hi.
Hi, Gordon. Nice to see you again as well.
Maybe I'll ask one final question that is a bit of a follow-up to that last one about breaking things and when is it taking it too far and breaking it or whatever. So my question is, I'm going to just turn that into a very specific question about that acoustic work that you played. I forget which one, like the penultimate piece, I think, where you had created this really beautiful sounding acoustic work and then added an electroacoustic part to it. And my question has to do with the ways in which sometimes adding electronics to an acoustic piece can or can break it. And at least in my experience, and I suspect you have thought about this because when I hear your music, I can tell that you're thinking similar things about space. I think a lot about space when I'm writing even just acoustic music. I'm thinking a lot about how it's going to interact in the space itself. And so it's very important to me to think about the way it will resonate in the space. And I make a lot of decisions about the orchestration. And I mean, maybe this is a spectralist kind of mentality or something, but I hear that in your music too. And so what I'm wondering about is one of the things that's always a little bit of difficulty when you add electronics, depending on how you do it, but sort of the traditional approach of like, well, I'm just going to throw up a stereo mix and a pair of speakers and it's going to envelop the ensemble. And so all of a sudden there are all these opportunities to work in a new kind of space with the electroacoustics, right? I mean, unless you're thinking really seriously about how it's going to be diffused into the space along with the acoustic instruments. You kind of know what I'm saying? So in other words, I guess what I'm getting at is the danger of combining two spaces that kind of, what was Maurice Schaefer's term for that? I forget the funny term he made for that, but schizophrenia, I think is what it is. But so yeah, I'm wondering a little bit about that, about how you think when you take a piece that clearly seems to me already have some very spatial components to it, how do you deal with infusing another layer of dimension to a piece like that?
Yeah, well, I wish I could give you an elegant, sophisticated answer, but it has to do with getting my mind around what I want to do. So in that case, like I was saying, I had written an acoustic piece, 6 players, and they played it a whole bunch of times and recorded it, and I liked it, and it wasn't even my idea. So this was a good example of my trying to remain open and adaptive. I've been playing it for a few years, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to play your piece at an electroacoustic music festival." And huh? You mean like amplify it, or what are you going to do? No, could you write an electroacoustic part? Of course, half the time when someone asks that, they don't realize quite how difficult that is and how much work it is. But at first, I said, "Well, let me think about it." But I really was thinking, probably not. I'm perfectly happy. I like that piece quite a bit, actually. Um, but I thought more and I listened more, and like I was saying, I realized that despite its name, Violence, it's actually quite a sweet piece, mostly with a lot of space in it. And I guess that gets to part of what you're asking about, is a piece with its own profile and character and its own sense of space. That's why at first I thought I wouldn't do it. But then I started thinking, okay, so if we close mic everything, then it'll actually match up with the kind of electronics that I'm starting to imagine for this, and then there will be a sameness that's coming, that's different. That was my biggest thing, is I wanted to create something new. I guess it's like a pop band wanting to do a cover of someone else. It's usually more interesting if you take it somewhere else. And so I felt like that's what I was doing with my piece. I didn't want to change it just a tiny bit and, oh, does that have a bit of electronics in it? I wanted it to feel integral. But it's a really interesting question that you ask, because again, there's a literal sense of the space of the piece, which changes usually only somewhat, but sometimes significantly depending on what kind of venue you're in. But there's also an aesthetic space, let's call it, or a profile or a character, certainly in my mind as the composer of it, but I think to some extent for anyone who hears it. So to reconcile those two and feel that I'm coming up with something that's worthwhile and different. So as I said off the top, I wish I had a sophisticated clinical answer for you as to why that's the case, but you're absolutely right that each piece has its own space, and when you change a significant element of it, you change that space. Which is why I'm not sure about you, but I often will indicate in the front of some of my pieces, whether it's to be amplified, whether it's generally not to be. And then I have some pieces where I literally have speakers inside a piano or walkie-talkies inside a piano or other resonating space, so that it's part of the character of it, but it's also literally part of the spatial identity of the piece. Hope that somewhat answers your question.
That's a great, and I don't actually think your answer had to be all that deep. And in fact, I think the one thing that you said out of all of that was very well considered. But the one just real practical decision you made about just saying, yeah, I'm also going to amplify these instruments. That actually, in some ways, like is the major answer that resonates with me, because I would be thinking probably something very similar, because that simple act alone of just making the decision to say, well, let's put the instruments in the sound system so that they're at least in the same plane, and then all of a sudden it really opens up what's possible. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
That was really also useful because there's a recording of that piece, because I'd heard them do it several times in several different places acoustically, and you get used to what it sounds like acoustically. But the recording is different, especially when the mics are very close. So that just got me to thinking, hey, I could use that as a way to transform it to something that would be different enough and leverage this other, or find a different element in the piece that I hadn't seen before and try to bring that out.
Great. Well, we are past 8:30, which is probably a good time to stop. I'm a little sad. It's our last event of the year. I thank everyone again for the support and coming out to these talks. And we have a little tradition. If you'd like to, please turn on your video and unmute yourselves, and we can give Gordon a round of cacophonous Zoom applause.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was great to be here. Great to see all of you. And like I say, really proud and honored to be associated with the SSI. It's fantastic for the U of A to have. I've shared it with my students, and I sort of monthly or so check out what's new and what's going on, and I'm sure it's led to great things and will in the future. So congrats.
And for those interested, I actually am getting it together to put something in the chat. I'm going to put a link in the chat for you if you didn't see this already, but this is a link to the YouTube stream on Friday at 7 p.m. So that will go live at 7 p.m. if you'd like to actually hear the concert. We're really looking forward to that. Until then, I hope everyone has a great evening. And we'll see you all. Hopefully, see some. Well, I know we won't see each other on Friday, but I hope I will hear you listening. I'll be there. And thank you again, Gordon. This has been really fantastic. Thank you.
Great questions, and thanks again.